Thank you for taking time out of your day to join us on the Curbside as we waste a little more time in the garage with Jim Cherry, noted author, illustrator, and columnist for all things automotive, and Tony Barthel, publisher of the Curbside Car Show Calendar. This is podcast episode number 4 for November 12th, 2018. This week we point the spotlight at BMW and their iconic Isetta. Let's head to the garage and see what's going on this week on the Curbside.
Welcome to the Curbside Podcast. This is Jim Cherry of Cherry Classics. I'm here with the inimitable Tony Barthel.
Wow, that's a $5 word right now, and so thank you. It's good to be back this week. Episode number 4. We just keep getting more and more, and it's exciting.
Yes, and this time we're doing something completely different. Rather than Tony interviewing me about the content of this week's column, Tony has commandeered the writing chair, and he has written this week's entry about the BMW Isetta. So I'm going to be on the other side of the desk asking the questions, and Tony's Mr. Content this time. Tony, what was it about the Isetta? Why did you bring that up as your topic for this week?
Well, it just happened. I came across a gentleman, Nick Drummond, and I found out that Nick had a BMW Isetta, and I am quite fascinated by microcars and bubble cars for whatever reason. It's just so different from what we have nowadays. So when I had the privilege of talking to Nick, I found out he actually bought the car before he ever was able to drive. He bought the car when he was 14, and somehow he convinced his mom to rent a U-Haul truck with a tow dolly and go and pick up this Isetta 2 states away.
Wow.
So 14-year-old, and the way he came across the Isetta, he actually traded other stuff, including an odd 3-wheel gasoline-powered car, and came up with the money, and then he went and bought the Isetta.
Well, he gained a wheel because although many people think the Isetta is a 3-wheel car, it actually does have 2 rear wheels. They're just very close together. So close, in fact, Tony, there's no differential.
Yeah, that was one of the ways they're able to save cost is no rear differential. The wheels are so close together, so fewer mechanical parts. This whole car came about from ISO, an Italian company, and they made motor scooters and appliances. And as the economy started to get a little better in Europe, they thought it'd be appropriate for them to come out with an actual car. But the parts they had, of course, were motor scooter parts, and that's what they put in. The initial ones, built in Italy, used a 200cc moped motor. So you get a whole car powered by a moped motor.
Yes, and Tony, my understanding is that ISO actually produced consumer appliances before building this car. So actually they made refrigerators, and they put a refrigerator door on the front of the car.
Well, not quite, although that would have been cool.
Oh boy, here we go. Wah, wah.
Didn't take me long. If you're not familiar with the Isetta, it's kind of a bubble-shaped car that looks like it's got 3 wheels but has 4. They were built throughout the 50s and into the early 60s. Probably the most iconic feature on this car is that instead of there being side doors, the entire front of the car swings open to allow you to get in and out. And as part of that swinging open, the steering wheel is actually hinged to the door. So when you open the front door, the steering wheel swings out with it, which is quite unusual to see, but makes ingress and egress actually pretty good.
That seems very clever, Tony. However, it does seem to imply that the driver then becomes the crush zone.
Kind of like driving one of my favorite vehicles, the Corvair van, where you're the first one to get to the accident.
Or one of the old Volkswagen buses, of course.
Oh, yeah. One piece of sheet metal between you and whatever's about to kill you.
You know, a lot of people may not be familiar with the looks of an Isetta. Of course, they can go to curbside.tv under our stories and look up your wonderful article about this subject. But short of that, they could also look up or remember Urkel, the character Urkel from the Family Matters sitcom on ABC. That's the car that he drove on that TV show. So a lot of people saw it there.
And you know, like all Isettas, his had a sunroof. And do you know why that is?
And that's because they were afraid if there was a front end crash with that door being the front of the car, you wouldn't be able to get out of it. So they gave you a sunroof to crawl out of in case of an accident. My theory is no one would be capable of crawling out of that car if they were hit in the front.
No, if you rear end, let's say a Dachshund or something even more substantial, those last two words you say are probably your final word.
They could be. Now, it's interesting. One thing I came across looking at this car was the fact that it was made in several countries. Is that correct?
Yeah, so they actually didn't make that many cars themselves, and then they licensed it to BMW, and that license was so inclusive, it included the entire assembly line. And so BMW took it, and then ISO also licensed cars, so they were all over the globe, including Spain, Belgium, France, Argentina, Brazil, and other places. So these things were actually produced all over the world. And it was, again, at a time when the economy of Europe was just kind of starting to get in gear, as it were. And so these little bubble cars were actually quite popular at the time. And ISO built only about 1,000 of their Isettas, but over time, BMW actually managed to make 160,000 of their copies.
Yeah, my understanding is that BMW, like all German industry, was recovering from the war. And the Isetta was actually the mass-produced popular car that got their company funded again and got it rolling so they could make some of their more characteristic sports models that we're all fond of today.
BMW even then made high-end vehicles, and that just was not what was in demand in Europe. And so this car is credited with actually having saved the company. One of the things that Nick told me as he was driving this thing around, they're capable of going 53 miles an hour, at least the BMW versions. And he said, that's frightening because there's nothing in front of you other than that door. You're basically surrounded by the sheet metal. I mean, there's no crumple zones or anything like that. You're in this tiny little bubble with your head surrounded by glass. So obviously the visibility is fantastic, but still it's this little teeny car that you're going down the highway and puttering along with this 300cc motor. That's what his has. And it's just a horrifying experience, made more so by the fact that the brakes on this thing are more like taking a request at a radio station. Oh, sure, you may put in your request, but that doesn't mean you're going to hear it.
Yeah, they were perhaps quite a bit better suited to tiny European winding roads and little village streets, cobblestone little paths between old medieval buildings. They were pretty adept at that, very maneuverable and small. You could park it anywhere. However, you get that same car in America, you put it on the interstate with cars going 75 miles an hour, it doesn't quite translate as well.
Sitting in that car, let's say at the same time you buy a 57 Isetta and you drive next to a 57 Chevy, it's sort of like driving in a Miata and being next to a lifted Dodge diesel.
Yes, not the most reassuring experience, I'm sure. But they did sell some in the U.S. They weren't very popular, but they did sell some. I remember seeing a few around.
Yeah, and there's a good collector market for them too. Now, of course, they're so unusual that they're popular, and there are actually microcar car shows that specialize in these very, very small cars. In fact, I went to one once and there was a Corvair there, and that car just looked huge compared to all these other microcars.
I'm sure. Yeah, they were popular in Europe, especially, like you say, due to the ruined economies from World War II, along with cars like the Messerschmitt kabinenroller. And there were a few others that were very minimal motorcycle-based cars that got the countries moving again, while they geared up for the big sedans like the Volkswagen Beetle.
Yes, indeed. ISO's market share was really harmed by the Fiat 500 because the Fiat 500 actually had a back seat and could hold 4 people.
Yes, it probably wasn't that much more expensive either.
No, and it was just much more of a car than this little Isetta. Until 1956, especially in Germany, you could get away with driving this with a motorcycle license, which was a much easier thing to get than an actual car driving license. It's not like the DMV here, where if you show up with a heartbeat that may be detectable, you get a license. Over in Germany, there's a lot of testing and all of that to get a driver's license. So different world over there.
That's what's the current state of the Isetta. It is a very popular collector car these days, and prices have been going up on them. I've seen them, I don't know, maybe even more than this, but I've seen them in the $25,000 range and up.
Especially if it's well maintained or well restored. There's people who really like the original, which was essentially, it was like a park bench with a a motor scooter motor and a bubble on top. That's effectively what an Isetta is. But BMW did come out later with a model that had a back seat and actually had one rear door, and that one did not have the sunroof. So there are collectors who really like the original smaller one, and then there are some who favor the slightly larger one, only because it's less like a death trap. However, it does still have that giant front door.
Yes, that's pretty much the signature of the famed Isetta. Tony, do you think these cars have a future at all?
They did bring back the Fiat 500.
True, and I'm glad you brought that up because I led into my own answer here. They are bringing back the famed Isetta in a new form.
Why?
One might wonder. Very good question, sir. But actually, the new idea with the Isetta, which is called the Micro Mobility Systems Microlina, is an electric microcar with a lithium-ion state-of-the-art battery, good for 75 miles, and another one will go up to 133 miles with a 4-hour charge time. Strictly a city car with a top speed of 55 miles per hour, pretty much the same as the original one. But it would carry people, city centers, easy to park, non-polluting. They plan to build around 100 per year and eventually ramping up to 5,000 per year.
Now, the big question, does it have the big swing open front door?
It does. That much is true to form. And because of that, it's unlikely to pass U.S. crash standards. I would say quite unlikely.
Yeah, you have to be able to survive a collision to sell a car in the U.S. And having a gigantic front door and then a sunroof as your safety feature, I don't know if NHTSA is going to let that fly.
They wouldn't even waste a crash test dummy on it, I don't think.
No, I think even the crash test dummy might run and hide.
So we'll probably never see these electric Isettas, but it's a good attempt to make a very minimal, economical electric city car, which in some form or another, we're going to have to start seeing those more commonly here in order to relieve some of the congestion in our city centers.
Yeah, but Global Electric Motors, or GEM, which is a company Chrysler bought, I think, in the 90s, they made a small electric car that was street legal to like 35 miles an hour. In fact, you can still get them, and they're, you see them at fairgrounds and such.
Yeah.
In some neighborhoods, you do see those GEM cars, and they're pretty slick, and they'll keep up with traffic as long as it's not 70 miles an hour, and they're electric powered.
And that's why the GEM can get away with avoiding the restrictions on safety because it's limited to that 35 mile an hour top speed. They're great cars for puttering around neighborhoods and things, but they're not enclosed fully, is my understanding. They're kind of open air. So I'm not sure they'd be good for Michigan winters as so much.
Though I know you can get, I believe, canvas side doors, and there are even some fiberglass side doors you can buy. I've seen GEM security vehicles that have the plastic side doors. There is some of that. And like the Isetta, the GEM has sliding windows. The initial Isetta did not have sliding windows that would open. There was one little triangular window that would kind of pop open, and then later it became more luxurious and more fancy with sliding side windows.
Well, it's important to be able to pay your tolls, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
Interestingly enough, the Isetta had the headlights, because the door was the front of the car. It had the headlights mounted just on the side in the front as little teardrop, add-ons. Whereas the new electric Microlino Isetta has the headlights where you'd think the rearview mirrors would be up high there, right at the belt line. So otherwise, it pretty much copies the styling and the look of the original Isetta.
That's interesting. We're gonna have to post a picture of that on Curbside.
Absolutely.
And earlier, I failed to mention, speaking of microcars and microcar shows, we have a few microcar shows listed on the Curbside Car Show calendar, and it's always free for you to post your shows of any kind. Microcars, car shows, whatever. So take advantage of that. There's no charge to post a car show there, and we get a lot of people looking for car shows.
What's the address of that place, Tony?
It would be www.curbside.tv.
Yes, that's where you'll find all the different stories and blog posts we've written about these cars. Everything we talk about here, basically, you can go there and see the pictures and read a little more detail on it. So we do encourage that.
Indeed, and lots of stuff to do. And you can also, as with Nick's car, I'm always looking for stories to write about individuals and the cars that they take care of. And so if you have an interesting car, there's a contact us form. Feel free to write in, and we'd love to do a story about your car. You might be here on the podcast or on the pages of Curbside. In fact, we have a really interesting car for Veterans Day, so stay tuned for that. That's going to be something to see.
I have one last statistic for you, and that is the Microlina, the electric Isetta car, is, believe it or not, it's 2 feet shorter than a smart car. So this thing is really, really tiny.
Have you ever driven a smart car?
I have.
What was your impression?
I liked the seating position. You kind of sit up a lot higher than you would think you would. It's a confident seating position with a good seat. You feel like you're ready to rock and roll. And then you have to deal with that funky transmission.
Yeah, that is the worst transmission I have ever experienced in a car.
I only did a brief test drive. I never got the hang of it. I have a friend who owns one. He says, "Oh, you get the hang of it, and it's really easy." But it was so bizarre to try to drive that thing. I don't know what they were thinking. Plus the fact that they require premium fuel. They don't get very good mileage for what they are. They're just kind of a strange little car.
Yeah, you could go out and buy a Corolla, which gets about the same fuel economy and has a normal transmission and a back seat. And it's sort of like, why would you buy an Isetta when you could buy a Fiat 500, or even BMW later came out with a small car that kind of squashed the Isetta. So
you're saying Isetta, you're meaning smart car.
No, I mean, it's sort of the equivalent of, you go back in time and the Isetta kind of dropped off because cars with back seats came in. That's the same thing with the smart car. I just can't see a justification for it.
It's a problem with building cars. It's not that much more expensive, hardly at all, to build a real car with 4 wheels and, a back seat and all that good stuff, as it is to build a little smart car. It's not that much more expensive. It's once you build a car, there's a very little differential actually between building a Ford Taurus and a Cadillac in terms of the cost of production. Of course, they mark them up and they make them look fancy, so people will pay extra. But the problem is it's just very expensive to build any car, even a little tiny smart car, and you just can't make much money on them.
Yeah, I remember when GM came out with the X cars, which we now look back on as a gigantic flop because of the reliability, but they were touting the fact that it was the first car that cost $1 billion to develop.
Wow. I know the first Taurus cost them a $1.5 billion, I believe it was, to put that first Taurus on the street. But that, of course, was a hugely successful car compared to the X cars.
Yeah, the X cars, the first year, just Chevrolet alone sold over 700,000. And I think the next year they were at about a third of that.
Yeah, I remember renting one when they first came out, and it was like the steering felt like it was connected to the wheels by a rubber band. It was so loose and numb and uninvolving, and just, I hated that car.
Yeah, but by the same token, it was so much better than most of what else was out there. In terms of size, it was a great size. It was so advanced in terms of, the features that it came with and all. And so it was a huge hit until GM figured out they couldn't screw them together properly, and America caught on and said, no thanks.
And so we go off on a tangent once again.
As is anything to talk about cars. We love cars. So you're right, but we are good at the tangents.
Yes, and the X car is probably the most frivolous, uninteresting tangent we have yet achieved. So we got that going for us, Tony.
That's true. Well, no, we still haven't hit on Pacers or Corvairs.
Well, those are interesting cars. You like them or hate them, they are of interest. The X car is really hard for me to get very hot and bothered about, I have to say.
Me too.
Not a collector's item.
No, not at all. Well, plus all the duct tape you're going to go through keeping the thing from falling apart.
So sad.
Well, that's what I have on the BMW Isetta. There's more at curbside.tv. You can look that car up. You can meet Nick over there. You can tell us about your interesting car or find anything we've discussed in the podcast, or years and years of articles about all kinds of interesting cars there. So when you have a moment, if you would be so kind, go drop us a visit, www.curbside.tv, not .com, .tv, because I was too late getting the .com.
Thank you, Tony. I'll look forward to speaking with you next week.
While it may sound like 2 miscreants in the basement of their mom's garage, it actually takes a village to put this on. And we've got those village people. Head of transportation is Rolo Coaster. Healthcare provided by Dewey Hurt. Original content by nobody. Nobody at all. Thank you for joining us this week, and now go get something productive done. That honey-do list isn't getting any shorter.